at the beginning how you can change it.
We're going to go with the short and interrupt introduction today. Good afternoon, everybody. Everybody, good afternoon. Good morning, if that might be the case for you. Joseph F. Price here in the house. I've got some special flavor here. I got a special guest who came by to tell his story and to remind us that we all can recover, and that recovery is a journey. It's a step-by-journey process. It's a reversal of sorts, and it's an individual reversal. There's been time that you've invested into your addiction, whatever it is. There's effort that you put into it. That effort's individual. That effort's specific. And so the reversal is something that you have to be aware of and actually deliberately do. And when you do it, you do have healing and you do have recovery. That's sped up by having coaches and therapists and people to support you. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to reversal. But one of the things I want to take a look at today, and it's kind of a theme that I'm noticing, and I don't know if I put it out there to you in such a way where it's really clear, but I happen to be a behavior scientist, like foremost, like that's where I start with, and that's how I got into this through the back door. Without the story, you're not going to get the story today. You can go back to a couple episodes and get the story. But one of the things I like to do is actually really study people, and I've been studying clients, and I've been studying patterns, and I've been studying what happens a lot of times with addicts, porn addicts specifically. And so we all start out some kind of way. We call it vanilla porn, where, well, maybe it was looking at a still image, and then it progressed into what it progressed to, movies. But then at some point in time, it progresses for some people out of the porn. See, because what we know is that you have sexual addiction. Think of that as an umbrella. And then think of the gateway to all of the various prongs of sex addiction. Think of the gateway to that as porn. And then when people get out of porn, it manifests itself into all different things, strip clubs, all kinds of different things. Some people, it's just getting, 15 terabytes and methodically having a cache. For some people, it's other things. For some people, it's illegal things. For some people, it's chat rooms. We have a earlier session where somebody spent $200,000. So my guest today, his pornography use graduated into buying sex workers. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to a wonderful gentleman that graciously decided that he was going to spend some time with us, Mr. Allan Teixeira. Did I pronounce that correctly, sir?
You absolutely did.
Okay,
thank you.
Good. How you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing well, and I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure to have you with me. So I guess, right out the gate, you can go ahead and do your thing and tell me your story. How did you get here? And
yeah, wow.
Do it any way you want.
Well, I appreciate the introduction. I will let your audience know that when I talk about the time in my life when I quote unquote left porn and went to direct sex buying, I use the term metastasized instead of graduating, because it is really like a disease. So, it's not easy for me to get out here and, spill my guts and talk about this. It's embarrassing. It was shameful until I understood my why at its root. And I learned a lot about addiction, what makes an addict. And my therapist in group therapy actually said several months into my healing journey that that I was a textbook case and that I really had no chance at avoiding, you know, where my life went with this problem until I got the right kind of help. So, you know, addiction is really driven by anger and grievances and unmet needs that a person may have, typically in their family of origin. Our families of origin are not perfect, and this was the case for me. When I was born, my mother was ill. She was bipolar. Back then, they called it manic depressive, and we lived in, you know, a time. You know, I can't really blame the doctors or anything like that, but the treatment for manic depression has moved quite a bit over the decades. So back in the 70s, they had limited medicines. My mother took lithium, and she was not 100% compliant, you know, with her medicines. She, just like an addict, she had stigma and shame about the disease. She didn't want to admit it. At that time, she was pretty young, you know, mid-20s. And so she, as a result, ended up really being over-medicated most of the time, which meant she was depressed and not able to really participate in the family at all. Certainly not as a parent. She couldn't engage with me or do anything to enrich me. And she wasn't even functioning as an adult in the marriage. You know, my dad pretty much had to take care of her. So that put me in a pretty bad spot. You know, I needed her just like any little boy would need his mom. I wanted her to hold me and touch me and love on me and, you know, do things with me and take care of me and all that. And she just didn't. And so I was left trying to process this withholding that I was seeing from her. And as a young toddler, you know, you don't understand illness and that it's not her fault. You know, it was only through good quality Christian therapy much later in life, in fact, only a few years ago, that I was able to move the grievance and the blame I felt against my mother off of her and just onto the fact that she had a disease. And that did a lot for, you know, how I process my memory of her. So I had that life wound of neglect, feelings of abandonment, feelings of not being worthy that all came out of this. To make matters a little worse, and this is another ingredient in what can build an addict, you know, my dad was very authoritarian in how he dealt with me. He's a good guy, but let's face it, you know, he was the only breadwinner. He was essentially a single parent because my mother wasn't participating. And he really had to deal with 3 kids on his own. There was me, my little brother, and my mom, who, because of her ailments, really presented as another child for him to deal with. So he was stressed. He was always stressed out, and you know, he just didn't have time to parent me in a way that, you know, we would like to see, that required more patience. I lived in a house that was all about rules and not relationship. I was to be seen and not heard. I didn't have anywhere to express my feelings. And when things got bad, whether, you know, if I did something that was wrong and it was appropriate for him to discipline me, he tended to overreact. And, you know, there was some harsh physical discipline. But really the worst experiences I had as I got a little older is my mother would have these episodes where she would escalate into mania. And those were particularly hurtful because as a depressed manic depressive moves from that depressed state to mania, there's a couple days there in the middle when they're normal. And those days were great. It was like I had my mom back, and she would do art projects with me and engage with me, and I just loved it. But it didn't last. After that short window, you know, she was off the rails in a manic episode, and she did some things that were very hurtful to me, physically and emotionally and even sexually. So I had those types of wounds, and I think that by itself, would have been enough to set the table for me to become an addict. And I probably would have had some demonstration of sex addiction or porn addiction just with that. But as I moved into my teen years and young adult part of my life, I also had the misfortune of suffering two what I consider to be very severe traumas. The first was this. At the age of 15, we moved from Massachusetts to Gainesville, Florida. And because of that move, my mom had to find new doctors for her bipolar. And she did just that. And those new doctors were aware of new medicines, and they just sort of readdressed her problem from scratch. And they did it much better than what had been done previously. And she really got well. And so for about a year, from 15 to 16, my mom was available. She was engaged. Our relationship started to develop. Her marriage with my father blossomed. And as a family, we were really happier and more functional than we had ever been. And then Christmas Eve, 1983, when I was 16, she suddenly choked to death at the Christmas Eve dinner table. It was just an unforeseen and kind of terrible thing. None of the adults at that dinner really knew what to do. I was going for my Eagle Scout rank, and I had gotten a lot of first responder, life-saving type training. And so it fell to me to help my mother. And so I had the experience of trying to clear her blockage, doing the Heimlich maneuver. And after she ultimately passed out, performing CPR. Because of the holiday, there just was a slow response time. They didn't have a full complement of ambulance crews in our town. It was just one. And it took time for them to come and relieve me. But I did the job well. My mother was alive, and she had good color when they relieved me after 15 minutes of CPR.
Wow.
But sadly, she expired in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Mm. So that was tough. I can remember my little brother, when he saw me working on her, he just freaked out. He was 12 at the time. He was just screaming, and he ran into his room and hid under his bed. After the ambulance left, my father and my aunt, my mom's sister, went in the ambulance with her. And so that just left my uncle. And my girlfriend and I were at that dinner, and she and I went into my bedroom, and we were talking, and she wanted to go to her house just so she could be with her parents, and she invited me to go. And so my uncle stayed with my brother, and she just lived around the block. We walked over there, and her parents were downplaying it. They were telling me, people cough all the time. And I said, she didn't cough. I said, she choked. I'm using the medical definition. She choked. It's not good. And that conversation didn't really get to develop, and the phone rang, and it was my dad. He was back at home, and he said, you have to come home. So it was unseasonably cold that night. We're in North Florida. It was like 28 degrees. That's really cold for, Gainesville, Florida. Probably only gets that cold once a decade. And so I'm walking home, and I turn the corner to get back to my house. And I'll never forget, I have this real surreal image in my head of looking at my front yard. We had a lamp out in the front yard to light the walkway. And next to the lamp was actually in front of it was like my dad and our priest from church. And they were talking, and their breath was making plumes because it was that cold. And it was a silhouette because the light was candling them. And I recognized the priest right away, and I knew he would not be there unless my mother had died.
Oh.
So that's how I found out, essentially, before anybody told me. But when I got home, my dad brought my brother and I into the living room, and he told us what happened. And, I just tried to be the strong one, you know. I tried
Mhm.
to support my dad and my brother, but I did not deal with those feelings. I did not grieve properly.
So
And
then you say that you had number two. You had
yeah, well,
which equals a double whammy in my
yeah. So that girlfriend and I didn't work out, but there was another girl in the neighborhood that I formed a relationship with around the time high school was ending for me. And, you know, neither of these girls were emotionally healthy. Yeah, I just didn't have the equipment, I think.
they weren't
To,
emotionally healthy because you weren't emotionally
right,
healthy and you
exactly. I
attracted
wasn't.
somebody that
Right,
wasn't emotionally healthy. Okay, go ahead.
exactly. So these were toxic relationships that never really should have been. But that second relationship with Lynn, she and I got married, and it was just a bad mix. It was a bad match, and I was under constant inhumane amounts of stress. She wasn't really capable of keeping a job at that time in her life, and you know, so we had financial problems and all of this. When I finished graduate school, we moved to Wilson, North Carolina,
Mhm.
and I started my career up there with Cargill, and things were going really well professionally. Um, but we had this incident. We had two daughters at the time of this tragedy. They were 4, just under 2, and you know, we had this day planned out where I had a very important and high pressure meeting in the afternoon, starting at 1 o'clock. It was a round robin of personnel type interviews, reviews. They were annual reviews for the people that would be eventually on my staff. I was training to take over for an office manager there. And one of the ladies on that staff in particular was a woman of color who had legitimate performance issues going on. And they needed to be addressed. And she knew they needed to be addressed, but she was trying to make it about race when it wasn't. And that was a very high pressure and stressful situation for me to deal with as a young kind of junior executive. So I was stressing the meeting. We were a 1 car family, and the plan was that my wife was going to go with the older daughter to go shopping and do some errands in the afternoon with the family car. So since I took that car to work, I needed to come home for lunch. And the plan was the kids would be ready and she would have lunch made up for me. And we'd all just pack into the car. I would ride shotgun and eat my lunch on the way back to my office where she dropped me off. And then she was going to take the younger one to daycare um, because it was important to her to just have this afternoon with the older daughter. There are deeper issues there where you know, she just didn't bond properly with the second child, and she didn't want to, and I'm using her words, didn't want to deal with her.
Mhm.
Very unhealthy. But and to make matters even more complicated, she had burned bridges and rubbed people the wrong way at the daycare that we had been using. So she had recently found a new one that I wasn't familiar with, and it was this new daycare that you know she wanted to use that afternoon. So when I got home at lunch, like we had planned, um, you know, none of that stuff was happening the way we planned. She was not
Life
responding to the,
usually works out,
yeah, yeah, that's right.
not the way you plan.
It was not the way we planned. So she wasn't answering the door, and it turns out she wasn't even awake because she suffered from depression too, just like my own mother. So, you know, there's a deeper story there also, right?
Mhm.
But it was before cell phones, so I was like you see in the movies, I was throwing pebbles up to the master bedroom window to rouse her out of bed, and she finally came down. She was very angry, you know, that I had done that.
Mhm.
I'm not sure why. But our little one, Lauren, was in her crib, and it was obvious to me she had not been cared for all morning. She was hungry and in a diaper that needed to be changed, and it looked like that had been the case all morning. The older daughter was just in her room playing. She was very good at occupying herself. So she was sort of self-soothing with some games. And so I was trying to come up with an audible to deal with the situation. And the audible was, go get yourself dressed and get Ashley ready. I'll take care of the baby. I'll change her diaper, I'll bathe her, I'll clothe her, I'll pack the diaper bag, I'll feed her, and meet me down here in like 15 to 20 minutes. You know, I'll throw together a sandwich for myself and then we'll get in the car and leave. And she said, fine, that's great. About 20 minutes go by. I finished doing all those things that I had agreed to, and I called for her, and she comes back down, and she had just gone back to bed. She was still in her nightgown, and she said, look, I'll just do this stuff another day, go back to the office, but I need you to take Lauren, the younger one, to the daycare because I don't want to deal with her.
She wanted to go back to sleep, basically.
Yeah. So, you know, this was highly disturbing to me. So I grabbed my little daughter and the diaper bag, and I went to the car, and I put her in the car seat, which was really directly behind me on the back seat driver's side. And I put the diaper bag in the car, and then I got into the driver's side, and I was preparing to back out, and I hear this tapping noise, and I look across to the house, and her big sister had gotten the stool out of the kitchen and put it up to the dining room window, and so she could stand up over the sill, and she was waving goodbye to us, which she had never done before. But that's another thing I'll never forget. So, I back out of the driveway, and I'm heading over to the daycare, which was actually the same way that I would go to work until this one major intersection in our town. And I was just under an inhumane amount of stress, just consumed with this problem. I'm the only one making money. She can't hold a job. The only way I can take care of the kids for her is if I quit my job, and then we won't have any money. My parents had offered to help, but she wouldn't allow that. Her parents just did not want to admit that there was a problem. They didn't want to admit that their princess was depressed, that she needed therapy and maybe some medicine. They just would not go there. So the normal recourses you would think of were
ignored.
Not available to me. They wouldn't consider them. So then really the only healthy option I had left was really to separate from her and take the kids. Problem was, I wasn't healthy. I couldn't consider that option. She was my only acceptable sexual outlet, and I didn't want to lose that. And because of the way my sex addiction, even though I didn't know it existed, played into my decision making at that time in my life when I was still very immature, it was just incredibly damaging.
So
because
tell me
I would
what
choose
happened
to
that
just
morning.
take on all the stress. Well, yeah, this is around 12:30, 12:45 in the afternoon. So I start driving to the daycare, and we get to that big intersection, and it's backed up. There's, I want to say, 3 or 4 light cycle delays. And during this time, poor little Lauren had fallen asleep. And so she was in a place in the back seat where I couldn't see her normally. Like if I checked the rear view, she wasn't in that field of view, and she wasn't making any noise. And when it was finally my turn to go and make the right turn to this new daycare I hadn't been to before, I can't explain what happened, but I just went straight, which was the way I normally went to work, out of habit.
Yeah, habits are
they call this
that branded, just like
they call this a habit memory failure is what they call it.
Yeah. And you had said something somewhere else I read about the addiction process and paths. Tell me about that before you about the addiction process and like walking through a field of grass. Tell
me yeah, we can go there.
Yeah. I thought that was a great
so there's this analogy we use in our groups when we're talking about the neuroplasticity of the brain. Because
Mhm.
what most people don't understand with pornography is when a guy watches pornography for the first time, that's a moral failing. It's a poor decision. A lot of guys make it. But as soon as you see porn, even for the first time, it changes your brain. It changes the pathways and the structure of it. It starts to atrophy, just like a heroin addict, and you build synapses and pathways of thinking that are geared to consuming porn, and they grow. And because they grow, it makes you want to go there again and again. So what starts off as a moral problem very quickly becomes a medical problem.
And then
So
how,
the analogy we use is like, imagine a field out in the middle of the woods. What happens to that field, pristine field, if you walk across it on the same path every day for like a year?
it gets worn.
Yeah, the guy say, well, a path forms, a pathway, it gets worn. And we're like, right. And what happens if you stop walking every day for a couple of months? And they're like, well, the path starts to grow over again, right? It starts to heal. And that's exactly how our brain works, because I mean, every part of our body, every muscle, every neuron, every tendon, everything is plastic. It can be damaged, but it can be healed. And this is the key to recovering from pornography. You need to abstain and do a long period of sobriety to give your brain a chance to heal those pathways. And when you do that in combination with lots of other things, like coming out of isolation, forming connections and relationships with other healthy men, studying the material about how to overcome the addiction, strengthening your relationship with God, you do all these things together and you can pull out of it, but you need community to pull out of it. You can't really do it alone. And so many guys are just white knuckling it and trying to do it alone. It doesn't work. So what essentially happened to me that day, it was explained to me by a doctor. There's a Amazon Prime movie called The Death of a Child. Now, I don't usually watch these things because this is a painful subject for me, right? I don't like to.
It's triggering. You don't
Yeah,
want to be
I
triggered.
just don't want to watch movies where kids die or anything like that. But something told me to give this one a try.
Mhm.
And it was not only about parents who suffer the death of a child, but parents who suffer the death of a child because of their own negligence.
Mm.
And specifically, that they left an infant or a toddler in a car unattended that got overheated. And that's obviously that's what happened to me when I went straight through that intersection and I went to work. And I rushed into that important meeting that I was late for, and I didn't see her. And I stayed there on task for 5 hours. I was the last manager to leave. And of course, I discovered my little girl passed away when I went to go home for the day. So what happens is it's like this. We actually have two memories, two types of memory in our brain. One is governed by the hypothalamus, and the other is governed by the basal ganglia. The hypothalamus handles your executive memory, your to-do list.
Mhm.
What are the things I want to accomplish today? What's the sequence? What are the prerequisites for each thing? Like, what do I got to remember to bring? All that stuff, that executive agenda is contained in the hypothalamus. And we operate on that all day long. But the basal ganglia has these subroutines for things you do frequently, like when you drive to work, for example. Nobody thinks about their drive to work. It's rote memory, right?
Mhm.
You could arrive somewhere that you've gone to 100 times, whether you're going to work or going home, and you don't remember the details of that trip really. You just arrive, right?
You'd
So the
be
way it works,
overwhelmed if you had to
yeah,
do all of that.
yeah. So the way it works is like this: you're operating on that executive agenda memory in your hypothalamus. Say you go into McDonald's to get lunch to go, and they hand you a bag and a diet soda, right? And you
Mhm.
go walking out to the car. Well, car's locked and your keys are in your pocket. So most people will take that drink and put it on the roof of the car, shuffle for their keys, unlock the car, and get in. Well, the moment you go for your keys, it initiates the basal ganglia and that subroutine to drive wherever it is you're going to drive next. And that takes precedence over the executive agenda in your hypothalamus. And you see it all the time. People will leave their purse on top of the car, they'll leave the Diet Coke or whatever on top of the car, and they'll drive off, because the
And
basis
people be
ganglia
beeping
has
at
taken
them
over.
and so
This
forth.
happens
Yeah,
all the time with innocent consequences.
Mhm.
But this is what happened to me, and it's happened to
Countless, a lot.
like 1,400 people in the
Mhm.
last 30 years. And it only started happening when airbag technology became widely available or standard in the cars. Once before then, like in the 60s, people would put a baby seat in the front so they could, take care of their baby. But when they
So they're
when they
finding
put an
it's
airbag
happening.
in the front, that'll kill a baby if it goes off. So that's when we all started putting babies in the back. And
Yeah.
when babies started falling asleep and we couldn't see them and they accidentally got left behind.
Isn't
That's
that
when that
funny?
started about 30 years ago. Yeah.
Hmm.
And there's things you can do to mitigate that. But unfortunately, this is what happened to me. And it was just devastating. It was the
Well,
worst.
as Dr. Phil would say, that's a life-defining moment.
Yeah, it changed everything.
Yeah. So
I will say, though, that even though that was the worst day of my life,
that was the
when
beginning of the best days of your life.
it was, but I did have one of my finest moments in the midst of all that tragedy, and it was this. When I found her, I picked her up and I went straight back into the building and I called the police on myself. I didn't lie. I didn't hide. I didn't try to figure out some way to get away with it. I knew that what I did was not on purpose. And I knew that there were a lot of people that weren't going to believe that. And I knew that this was going to change everything. But I also knew I had to do the right thing. And I did that.
Mm-hmm. Now,
and
go ahead.
I was just saying, I just think that speaks volumes of who I am at my core, that I didn't run from that tragedy.
Mm-hmm. And I do think it was a pretty sorry day, but when you look back, that probably was the day that stuff started to begin to change in some kind of way. It probably got worse before it got better. So if you can walk me through and take about like 5 minutes to walk me through your porn journey up to what you're doing now.
Yeah, I was exposed to porn very early age. So, like I explained, my mother was depressed all the time, so I was never supervised.
Mhm.
And at the age of 6 years old, a good friend of mine and I were out just exploring, and we came across a stash of pornography, a
Oh,
grocery bag, about a cubic foot of Playboy Penthouse type magazines, which, pretty explicit. So that's very damaging to a child of 6. You can't really process what you're looking at, but it was alluring and interesting, and I gazed at the images and they attracted me, and so quite naturally, when I sexually matured, I sought that out, and I noticed how good I felt when I had an orgasm, and so I just slipped into this habit and um, of masturbating to self-soothe how badly I felt about things. I didn't even realize how much I was hurting back then. Because like a fish doesn't know it's wet, but I just felt the need to feel better, and this was a way that I could feel better. As the years went on with technology, those magazines became videos, right? And then when the internet came, the variety of pornography genre that was available and the level of how explicit it was, that all deepened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
let me ask you a question, because you're more knowledgeable about facts than I. How many different titles do you think that there are in porn? I mean, the last count that you got. This is the last count. That's all.
I don't
the
know.
last count.
I saw a statistic from like 5 years ago that said if you watched all the pornography that has ever been produced by mankind, you would have to watch a continuous stream about 192 years long.
Yeah, I'd heard.
And that's an old statistic.
Yeah.
I don't know about the number of titles, but in group, my therapist Dave Hudson, he would joke, you know, that you could watch one-legged clown midget porn if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's everything is out there.
Yeah.
And we laugh at that. But the truth is that the genre of porn that a guy gravitates to actually informs the wounds that he's medicating, even if he can't remember what happened.
Wow.
And a good sex therapist knows that. And you know, they'll talk to him about it. You know, for me, it's anything where the woman is completely submitting to me and gazing into my eyes. That's my trigger. And it shouldn't be any surprise. You know, I needed a mother who would be dedicated to me and take care of me and gaze into my eyes, and I never got one. So, you know, that's what drove me, that type of pornography. I was never into anything like is unfortunately prevalent today with the sexual violence and degrading women. None of that ever attracted me, but nevertheless, it's still damaging.
Mm-hmm. So how did see, because somehow masturbating and just watching porn didn't get it for you at some point in time. So how, you know, how did it gravitate to?
My problem, and this is true for a lot of guys, they actually suffer from what's called an intimacy disorder.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they don't know how to really open themselves up and communicate and relate to a woman the way a woman would want them to. And it becomes therefore very difficult for them to secure a relationship that includes sexual intimacy. But, you know, physically and physiologically, we still want sex. And so you can, like I did, metastasize out of a porn addiction into buying sex directly. Or if you don't buy it, you know, some guys will just have affairs with women who want to have affairs, or they'll, you know, like Tinder and all these things, the casual sex sites, they'll go that route. But what's happening is those magazines I viewed when I was 6, that was 2-dimensional. All the pornography on the videos and the internet, that's 3-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
When you involve another person, a living, breathing woman, she's warm, you can see her, feel her, that's 4-dimensional. And so you just found a better way to lie to yourself that you're enjoying true intimacy. It's not true intimacy. It's still pseudo intimacy. You're still faking it because you don't know how to have real intimacy, and or you can't trust another person enough to go there. So you go the transactional route or the casual route.
And then
to have meaningless sex, yeah.
And then you I mean, I just want to hear it out of your mouth. What happens is just the same way that people masturbate as an addiction. It becomes something compelling that takes over their life, even when they know they shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, I got to a point where I would try to use pornography to avoid being with a prostitute because I knew it was wrong or I couldn't afford it. And then the pornography would just trigger me to go do it anyway. And so it didn't take long, but then being with a real woman in person, however I needed to do that, was my preferential way of acting out, not the pornography anymore. And so when I was healing and reaching sobriety, my sobriety date for pornography predates my sobriety date with women, with prostitutes, by about 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that in the data that I ultimately collected on other men through my nonprofit. And that's something that'll be the subject of our next talk. But yeah.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And see, that the problem is that's exactly what it takes to be successful. A lot of times, guys that were doing what you were doing, they try to take it all off the plate all at once, and then it never works. What you did was 1, 2, 3, and that's how you got them off the plate. You mastered one thing, and then you went to the next thing, and then you went to the next thing. Now, I call it the day of reckoning. It's the catalyst for change. So tell me about the day of reckoning.
All right. So we're going back almost 5 years. This was Easter season of 2018. At that time, I was still attending the Catholic Church. I made a change and left the Catholic Church shortly after this that I'm telling you about. But we were at a Catholic church in Tampa. It was Palm Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And we were at that point in the Catholic Mass, and the priest invited everybody for a silent prayer for their own intentions. Okay. I, at that time, was absolutely fed up with this addiction. I had tried and tried and tried to stop on my own, and I couldn't. And I sincerely prayed the most intense prayer of my life at that Palm Sunday church service. And I begged God to take it away from me. And I said, I'm not bargaining. I know you're not just going to take it away without consequences. There's a lot of really heavy chips that are going to fall. And I know that you'll help me pick up and deal with each of those chips, but this has to stop. And that next week between Palm Sunday and Easter, all kinds of things started going crazy. You know, I was working too hard with my business, and the tax prep because of the business was a huge burden. And it was already deep into March, and we had to file within 3 or 4 weeks. And so I met a lady when I was at breakfast at McDonald's who was just asking for work. And so she wanted, to make some money. And, I tried to be very forthright with this. So I gave her my card. I told her to share it with her husband, that I had data entry work for her to do to help me prepare my taxes. And that I would pay her like $10 an hour. And if he was okay with it, then I would hire her. And if he needed to meet me, that would be fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't tell my wife about this. So, she did all that. And then, she texted me back and said, yeah, she wanted to get started and when could we meet? And my wife saw that text. And, obviously at this point, she was very suspicious that things were going on outside the marriage. Because she's a smart lady, and you really can't hide this. I mean, women know. Right. They may not confront you, but they know.
Mm-hmm. They do.
And yeah. Funny thing we say in group, in the newer trilogy of Star Wars, the character Finn gets confronted by Han Solo when he says, you got another problem. And he says, what's that? He said, women always find out the truth. Always.
They do. They do.
Yeah, that's a good quote.
It's like when you're smart, you just learn how to make sure that they don't have to find out the truth.
Yeah,
so then that way your ride is a little bit smoother.
That's right. We traveled down to South Florida to have Easter at my wife's brother's house, and she confronted me on that trip. It was Saturday morning, and she asked me if I had sex outside the marriage, just wide open, not a specific person, just have you had sex outside of our marriage? And I just felt convicted that I had to tell her the truth and accept the consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So I told her yes. And she didn't speak to me because our little girl ran into the bathroom where this conversation was taking place. And at that time she was like 5, So we just stopped talking about it. Later in the day and the afternoon, her brother and his wife took our little one into a store, and they were watching her, and she got in the car with me, and she leaned over and said, this is what's going to happen. We're getting divorced. I'm taking Rosie away from you, and you're going to pay alimony and child support. I mean, she was furious.
Mm-hmm. She was scorned.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, this was so hard, man. I really felt like I was being crucified just like Jesus that weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And I woke up Sunday morning, and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go and face the family, because she wrote this long letter that she gave to them, exposing me and telling them everything. So I just walked. I went for a long walk around the area where our hotel was. And I probably ended up walking 15 miles, but I left at 7 a.m. and I called my friend Rusty Adshade, who lives out in Wyoming, and he was in the middle of his spiritual breakfast. It was 5 a.m. for him, but he took the call.
Mm-hmm.
And he stayed on the phone with me for like 2 hours. And even after we got off the phone, I kept walking. I probably walked for 4 hours, just trying to process everything that was happening. In a way, I was being resurrected then too, because that was the beginning of bringing my behavior into the light and being honest about it, which is that's where the healing starts. You have to stop the isolation. You have to stop the lying. You have to stop the hiding. You need to find a group of men that you can trust. And there are several groups that are designed for just this purpose, where you can share your story and share your pain and all the nasty things that you've done, where you can become fully known and fully loved for the first time. And it's a beautiful thing, because all of this sexual acting out and impropriety and addiction, it comes from wounds. We were wounded, usually as little young people. We were wounded in community. Therefore, we need to be healed in community. And there's really no natural mechanism for this, because we live such isolated lives. But in our recovery groups, we create that dynamic. And there are thousands of men all over the country participating in this kind of process in an effort to get well and to get healed.
Yeah, that's some fantastic work that you guys are doing. So tell me how your recovery evolved to where it is that you're actually serving men in the way that you serve them, and tell me about your organization and how you serve these men.
Well, I guess the silver lining of my wife and I separating was that I was finally free to pursue my healing journey. I knew I had a problem. I even approached my wife about going to Celebrate Recovery, and she forbade it at the time. She didn't like the stigma or the shame associated with that. She didn't want me going to any type of a group. But that's obviously what I needed. So when she asked for the divorce and I moved out of the house, I was free to do that. And I did. And I enjoyed Celebrate Recovery. And I met a gentleman there who invited me to a sex therapy group nearby. And so I went. The Celebrate Recovery was on Monday nights. This group was on Thursday night. And so I went to David Hudson's sex therapy group at his Christian counseling office in Wesley Chapel.
Oh, okay.
And when I experienced what that group was like, I just never went back to Celebrate Recovery.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
I'm not saying anything bad about Celebrate Recovery, but it's in the name. It's celebrating after you've recovered.
Right.
And I hadn't recovered. I needed to heal. And the resources that are necessary for healing go way deeper than the scope of CR. And I recognized that. So I went to the sex therapy group, and I met another gentleman there, and I ended up joining his church, and we started a Pure Desire recovery group there. And so I was doing 2 groups, and I worked very hard through the remainder of 2018 and all through 2019.
And everybody's recovery is different, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's very personal. It's like your fingerprint.
That's a good way to put it. That's a real.
But I will tell you that that divorce went final in December of 18. But by November of 19, my wife had seen such a change in me with the progress I was making in my recovery that she wanted to reunify.
See, that's a success story. That's why we have you on here.
It is. I will tell you, she always wanted to reunify. In May of 2018, like a month after I was served with divorce papers, she wanted to talk to me about other options. And I think what she wanted was a long-term separation with the intent of reunifying, if and only if I could overcome the addiction and stop my behavior. She didn't say that, but when she started talking about other options, I told her no. I know most people are like, what? Why would you do that? But here's where I was at that time in my life. I believed in my heart that what I was dealing with could not be fixed. I was out of control. I was convinced I was going to die because of it, probably of AIDS, that I was going to be outed and just absolutely ashamed, and that it was going to destroy me. And I just couldn't stop. So therefore, the only way I could protect my wife, who I really loved, was to stay away from her. It's the only solution I had at that time. And so I told her no. But then fast forward a year and a half, November of 19, I had learned quite a bit and accomplished quite a bit in my healing journey. And by then I saw how I could reach a point of lifelong healing, and that getting the family back together could be the best thing, not just for me and my wife, but for our daughter as well. And so we did that. And in May of 2020, we got remarried. And we'll be celebrating 3 years remarried coming up here in a couple months. So it's a real story of redemption. And,
Yeah, it really is. And that's,
you know, I really think that was what allowed me to come up with the idea for the nonprofit. Most people don't realize, but addicts tend to be very intelligent people.
there's
who are
a
very
there's a
creative.
there's there what it
Yeah.
is, unfortunately, is our excellence gets played
Right.
out in our addiction.
Yeah,
And if we
and the
can take
addiction.
our
If you-
excellence back.
That's exactly right. If you can stop the addiction, you have all this capacity, and some very amazing and wonderful things come out of that for the men who recover. And in my case, it was my idea for the Buyer Rehabilitation Project. And I'm looking forward to telling you a lot more about that concept and what we're doing and how folks can help, when we have our second podcast.
All right. So I got two things.
Okay.
If I missed anything about your daughter, if there was any parting words that you wanted to say about your daughter that we missed, was there anything that you wanted to say there?
You're talking about the daughter that I lost?
Yeah, Lauren.
No, I think we went into enough depth there.
Okay.
Yeah,
and
I
then-
think people get it.
All right. And then I have this signature question that I asked. It seems to be a good question. Let's say nobody heard anything that we talked about here in this particular conversation.
Okay.
What one thing would you want them to know about the healing process, sexual addiction, and becoming better? And with sex addiction, because it's so complicated, you can't really have it be one thing. So what's a couple things you want us to know?
Wow. Well, the first thing I would say is that there is hope. I think a lot of guys caught up in this think there's no hope. There is. There is a way out. The shed blood of Jesus Christ guarantees there's a way out. Dr. Ted Roberts says that in the Conquer series, and I believe it. It cannot be done alone. You really do need to reach out to other men and have a support group to help you overcome this. At the end of that journey is sobriety, lifelong healing, but deeper than that, God's plan for your life is there. He knows us. He's known us since he knitted us in our mother's wombs. And he has a glorious plan for your life. All the bounty that he has laid out before you, it's there just waiting. And I will say that most guys who get to the end of this journey and reach total recovery feel convicted and compelled to share that powerful feeling of freedom and redemption that they have. And they usually do that by wanting to become a leader and help other men. And I just think it's a beautiful message because, I'm not special. I've had a hard life, but I'm not the only person that's had a hard life. Lots of people have had less than ideal situations in their family of origin. Lots of people have had tragedies, even worse than the ones I've suffered. But the message is, if you can grow to the point that with God's support, you can reach out to other people who have been hurt in exactly the same ways that you've been hurt and share your healing journey with them and bring healing and freedom to them, I just think that's a great message. Imagine what the world would be like if everybody who suffered through something, if their response was to help others that are going through the same thing. That'd be great.
It would be, and what a world it would be. Hey, listen, Allan, I definitely appreciate you stopping by, sir, and sharing your story with us. Let me acknowledge you for doing it. First of all, it's not the easiest thing to do, obviously. I was just sitting there listening to my story the other day, and it's not even easy listening to it. But yeah, we appreciate you taking that risk, and again, I acknowledge you because that was my answer. The exact answer that you give. If we can serve somebody, it's worth it to embarrass yourself. But it's not really embarrassing. Why, you can't hold something that I did 5 years ago when I was ignorant. So it's not embarrassing, and that's not what I'm doing now. So that's not what we're doing. There was one before I leave. There was one thing that you said that really was like speaking my language. It's the language I use. Talk about the lineage. We're talking about shifting lineages, and that was the exact word that I used.
Yeah, well, I was gonna save that for the next one, but
No.
here it is. When I had this idea for the nonprofit, and really I didn't have it. I really think it's a divinely inspired idea. I think God gave me the idea, but it provides me with a mechanism to make an eternal investment in the lives of other men who are suffering in the same way that I have suffered. And that's a powerful thing. Marriages will stay together, or if it's a single guy or a guy who got divorced and he can't save his marriage, there's another marriage. There's people that are going to be born because of this type of intercession in the life of a porn addicted guy. And so you're affecting their life, but also their legacy and their lineage. And that's just such a powerful investment to make in other people. And when I realized that, I really felt that even though my life has been a train wreck up until the time I got well, that this was just a very elegant and perfect way to redeem it. It gives my life meaning, and it gives my little girl who died at 22 months old, her life, short as it was, it gives her meaning too. And that makes me feel a lot better about what happened.
And I wanted you to say that, number one, for like people like us that are coaches, but also for people that are addicts, for maybe that they would take the bull by the horns and embrace the fact that, if they correct their behavior, that they're actually shifting their whole family crest.
Yeah.
Because this is generational. There's a link in everybody's life to somebody that was an adult in my life, and that is my first exposure to the porn. If it wasn't an adult in my life, it was an adult in my best friend's life.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yep.
So again, Mr. Allan Teixeira, we greatly appreciate you stopping by, sir. If you can just let us know how we can get in touch with you, how we can get in touch with the organization you run before we go, please.
Sure. The website for the Buyer Rehabilitation Project is buyerrehabilitationproject.org. That's all one character string and then .org.
Go ahead and repeat that again, please.
Buyer Rehabilitation Project.org.
Thank you.
And there's a contact us page there, and you can email me or give me a call with the contact information that's there if you'd like to reach out. And I look forward to hearing from you.
I appreciate it. I greatly appreciate it. I appreciate you stopping by. And again, for everybody that's listening, we do have another podcast in the repository there, or in the future coming up, where we're actually going to get involved in the conversation into Allan's organization. So as always, we appreciate each and every one of you. This is a journey. You've invested 2,500 to 7,500 hours into what you got. And so it's going to take some time. It's going to take some effort to reverse it. And the best way to speed that up is by getting good guidance and good information. And that's what we've been trying to do. And that's what we'll continue to do each and every week. So with that, drive with care, walk with caution, make today and every day your living masterpiece. Thank you, Allan. Everybody,
Welcome.
have a nice day. Talk to you later. God
Thank you.
bless you. See ya.